Hi, how are you? My name is Jesus Rodriguez. I'm recording this video to all US friends and friends that speak English all over the world. Again, my name is Jesus Rodriguez and I'm currently running the project OrinocoTribune.com. It's a website with information in English about mostly political Venezuelan issues, but also about international issues related somehow with Venezuela. I was asked to talk about what is happening in Venezuela right now, so I decided to make this video in order to allow anyone around the world to use it to inform about what is happening right now in Caracas. I'm currently living in Caracas. So I decided to spread my words in two parts. In the first part, I'm going to talk about the internal analysis, the analysis about what is happening internally in Venezuela. And in the second part, I'm going to try to analyze a little bit what is happening in the international, scene. So basically, going to the first point, the internal issues inside Venezuela. I decided to split that in 5 parts. I'm going to talk about the people. I'm going to talk about military in second place. I'm going to talk about the opposition. That means opposition parties and opposition leaderships. Then I'm going to talk about the National Constituent Assembly and the legal framework connected to the current coup d'etat attempt, and the political strategy from the government from now on. So going to the first point, talking about the people, I have to let you know that disregarding what you might see, especially in social networks and mainstream media about problems and unrest in Venezuela, which is true, is not as it is portrayed. What I'm trying to tell you is that I consider that what is happening, is that the opposition has been paying a lot of criminals, mostly, to try to create riots and what we call guarimbas, especially in low-income, working-class neighborhoods of Caracas and other important cities in Venezuela, to promote violence like Fochi, violent Foquista, and that sadly have resulted in the killing, I believe, at least from the last numbers that I hear, on the killing of around 20 people in less than 2 days. That means, that number somehow show how what I'm saying about criminals being paid to create chaos is connected to the number of killings. Last year we have guarimbas also, but in 4 months of guarimbas, they were 120 people that died. So these numbers are alarming, and I believe that somehow they reflect what I'm trying to tell you, that there is some imported artificial violence that has been promoted and encouraged and paid by opposition right-wing factors in Venezuela. So we have to pay attention to that, and we have to pay attention to the narrative of the people, the poor people getting tired of Maduro's and the economic situation, and going down the cerros to get rid of Maduro. That's not true. That is not happening. So we have to pay attention to those details, because that's the narrative that they are trying to tell you. The narrative that they are trying to sell, but is completely opposite to the truth. That doesn't mean that a lot of Venezuelans, even Chavistas, we are suffering from the economic situation. But most of the Chavistas see in the government the only one that really is paying attention to us, and the only one that is trying to solve the problems. Most of the time, at least in the economic area, unsuccessfully. But at the same time, we know that the government is dealing with a reality of an economic attack from abroad, especially from the US, but also from the European Unions and recently from neighboring countries that right now are being, ruled by right-wing governments. So that's to give you an idea about what is happening around the people in Venezuela. And now talking about the military element, which I believe is important because a lot of people ask you about what is happening, what is going to happen with the military. I'm not an expert, but I live 2 blocks from the headquarters of the National Guard in Venezuela, and I have an idea of what is happening. And what I see is that the military in Venezuela is mostly amalgamated around the constitution, mostly around the government, around Maduro, around the revolution. But most importantly, if you ask me, I believe that they are amalgamated around the legality. And whatever the opposition has been trying to do in the last days is way far away from what legality means. Not only international legality, I'm talking about the constitutional, framework, the laws in Venezuela. So that's my perspective. That doesn't mean that there are not. I mean, Venezuela is very diverse. You have like people with millions of, political ideas, and no one thinks the same. Like some people abroad might think. So you might have a lot of right-wingers still in the military, but I believe that the government have them very well identified, and they are not in positions of, creating some sort of liability to the stability of the country, I mean. So I believe that the military option, which is one that is being hard promoted by the right-wing factors trying to see if they can gain some support for them after attacking them for years, after making fun of them, after whatever things that have been doing, attacking the armed forces in Venezuela, they have in recent years trying to backpedal that, I don't know how, and try to gain some support from those elements of the military that might, be discontented with the reality or whatever. And if you ask me, I believe that they are not going to succeed in that area neither. Now talking about the opposition, the opposition leadership is in the same chaos that they have been for the last, year at least. They are very disconnected. There's no unity among them, and I believe that even under the current circumstances, that's not going to change. Now talking about the opposition parties, I believe that it's important to highlight that even among those that were yesterday in Guaido's proclamation in the middle of the street as interim president of Venezuela, even among those people from political parties that were there, there's people that did not support that decision, and they have been saying that publicly in Venezuela in recent days. So I believe that there's a national opposition in Venezuela that is willing to negotiate at some point with the government. The problem is that the most extremist part of the opposition is the one with connections abroad, with connections to the media, and I believe that they are going to make for these other ones very difficult for them to try to see it in a possible negotiation process with the government at some point. So if you ask me, that's my opinion about what's the current reality of the opposition. Of course, within the opposition, you might also find the opposition followers, they're common people, and among them it's also important to highlight that yesterday there were 2 demonstrations, 2 marches in Caracas both were very numerous, not the traditional numbers that you can see in Venezuelan, demonstrations that are humongous, and I associate that to the hardship that we have been living in economic terms in recent months, especially in recent days. I mean, after the new year, the prices in Venezuela has been skyrocketing, but I believe that's another point. But what I'm trying to tell you here is that that might have affected a little bit the number of people in the street in both sides. I believe that the numbers of people that went to the Chavista demonstration yesterday were very high, and I also believe that the number of opposition people that the march yesterday was also very high, but not as usual. I mean, not as big as the numbers that we usually see in demonstrations in Venezuela. But I wanted to highlight that among the opposition followers, there's a lot of people that was in that demonstration yesterday, and I believe that not all of them support the leadership. I'm talking about from Guaido up, because Guaido is the lowest, rank in the opposition hierarchy in Venezuela, and everyone knows that. And I believe that that decision is not a casualty. I mean, I believe that decision is premeditated because they knew that they were going to spare him, as they already did. Actually, I mean, according to information that people managed here in Venezuela, Guaido, after proclaiming himself as president, went immediately to the Colombian embassy here in Caracas. So I believe that they are about to request an asylum or something like that. We have to see if the government is going to allow him to go out of the country, which I doubt it. So let's see what happens. But that's a general idea about the third element that I have in my design for what I want to talk. And now I'm going to pass to the element of the National Constituent Assembly and the legal framework. It's important when analyzing the current Venezuelan political situation that we have the National Constituent Assembly. And disregarding whatever the media says and the opposition leadership says about it, it was constitutionally called, constitutionally elected, and have all constitutional rights above all formal powers of the country. What I'm trying to tell you is that the National Constituent Assembly, that is formed by I believe that a little bit more than 500 Chavista leaders from all over the country, is above the executive power, is above the legislative power, is above the electoral power, is above the judicial power. So that gives us some sort of cushion in the case something radical happen. Even in the case we are in the middle of an international attack, an attack from abroad, I'm trying to say, or an attempt of assassination of authorities and things like that. So I believe that the idea of the National Constituent Assembly is something that is beyond applaudable for President Maduro, if you ask me. So that's what I want to talk about, the National Constituent Assembly, to give you an idea of the legal framework that in which we work. So now I'm going to talk about the legal framework of what happened. I mean, there's no constitutional or legal provision to try to defend what happened yesterday when this not crazy guy, because I believe he's not crazy, he was just following a script delivered to him by the US government, but that this guy make him decide to proclaim himself in the middle of the street interim, which term it's interim president of Venezuela. That term doesn't exist in the Venezuelan constitution. We don't have the term of interim president. That doesn't exist. and neither the vacuum of power, which is another term that I have been using lately, that doesn't exist in the country, in the constitution, I mean. So whatever argument they have been trying to use lately to make some sort of legal explanation of what they have been trying to do is bullshit. Sorry for my Polish, but it's the reality. I mean, there's no legal basis for what they have been trying to do in the last week or two. So I want to mention that in this point. And now to end this first part of my words, I wanted to stop talking about the political strategy of the government from now on. And I believe that that's what the government has been saying lately in recent hours and days. Yeah, and that is that the government is willing to sit to negotiate within the framework of the United Nations, within the framework of CELAC, within the framework of the Vatican. I mean, the government, President Maduro has been very insistent in saying that he is open to negotiations. I don't see that like very possible because the extremist section of the opposition is the one that is in control right now, and is the one with counterparts abroad. I'm talking in the Lima Group government's officials, in the U.S. government officials. So it's going to be very hard to make them, sit to negotiate with the government, because the followers usually see that as a capitulation, as their capitulation, not ours. So whenever an opposition leader sits with the government, is being like bombarded by the opposition followers saying that they are capitulating or negotiating behind curtains with the government, Venezuelan government, I mean. So it's gonna be hard, but I believe that right now, actually today, I hear that the Uruguay and the government of Uruguay and Mexico are talking about that option, are promoting an idea of an international negotiation process within the framework of the United Nations. I believe that the government is pointed that way, and I hope that someone, can manage to force those extremists from the opposition to sit with the government to try to find a solution to the most, complicated problems connected to the legal and political framework of Venezuela. So that's basically my general opinion about the internal elements that I highlighted for these words. And I'm going to talk, of course, about the international element, the international part of the problem. And I divided that in three parts. First, U.S. imperialism, of course. Second, the regional strategy, the regional reality. And third, the multilateralism, which is like basically the international foreign policy of approach of Venezuela and of a lot of countries around the world that do not want unipolar order. So let's start from the beginning. I want to talk about U.S. imperialism, and first I want to mention that that there's no doubt. I mean, the U.S. government get rid of all the masks that they usually use to try to cover their, coup d'etat actions. So in the case of Venezuela, they decided to take the lead and to send to hell the opposition leaders of Venezuela, and President and Vice President Pence 2 days ago went to the social networks and invite Venezuelans to go and demonstrate to get rid of the President Maduro. So in front of that, you have, it's like, wow, it's like, that's very unusual. And that's an evidence of what I wanted to say, that the U.S. government is leading the actions The U.S. government is the one promoting a regime change in Venezuela, how they call it, and the U.S. is responsible for whatever